Hashtag the petrodollar. Every book, a new way of seeing the world. Welcome to our book club. What if I told you the US dollar isn't backed by gold, isn't backed by trust, and isn't even backed by the US economy? What if it's backed by a deal? A secret handshake between Washington and Riyadh that's been holding the global financial system together for 50 years. And what if that deal is now falling apart? Today we're covering the petrodollar by David E. Wight. He spent 10 years digging through declassified government archives, Nixon's secret memos, Kissinger's negotiation records, Saudi royal family files, to tell the real origin story of this system. No conspiracy theories, just the raw history of how the US saved the dollar by turning oil into a financial weapon, and how that weapon is now pointing back at them. 3 parts. 1. How the old order collapsed and forced America into a corner. 2. The deal itself. Money for security. 3. The blowback, how this system planted the seeds for half the conflicts we see today. Let's go. Hashtag part 1. The old order collapses. Picture the early 1970s. America is in trouble. Vietnam is bleeding the treasury dry. The economy is doing something economists had never seen before, stagnation and inflation at the same time. They invented a new word for it, stagflation. Factories closing, prices soaring, wallets shrinking. But the real crisis was invisible. The dollar's foundation was crumbling. Since World War II, the dollar had been anchored to gold through the Bretton Woods system. The rule was simple. Bring us $35, get 1 ounce of gold. This promise made the dollar the bedrock of global finance. Everyone trusted it because it was backed by something real. But by 1971, that promise was broken. Too many dollars printed. Too much gold flowing out. European countries were cashing in their dollars. Fort Knox was draining. So on August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced the US would no longer convert dollars to gold. Just like that, the Nixon shock. Bretton Woods collapsed. The dollar became a floating currency backed by nothing but faith. Now here's where it gets dangerous. The dollar was floating, but oil wasn't. Oil was still priced in dollars. And the people selling the oil were watching their dollar earnings lose value by the month. The oil producers were furious. Iran's Shah and Gaddafi's Libya pushed OPEC to act. In 1971, they forced Western oil companies to the negotiating table and won the Tehran and Tripoli agreements, the first time oil pricing power shifted from Western corporations to producing nations. The era of cheap oil started cracking. Then came the match that lit the powder keg. The 1973 Arab-Israeli War. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The US responded with a massive military airlift to save Israel. The Arab world erupted in rage. Saudi Arabia and its allies unleashed the oil weapon. An embargo. No oil for the US. No oil for anyone supporting Israel. Global oil prices quadrupled. From under $3 a barrel to nearly 12. Gas stations had mile-long lines. Factories shut down. Schools closed. The Western industrial world ground to a halt. The oil crisis wasn't just economic pain. It was a humiliation. For the first time, the US was being strangled by countries it once dismissed. And it exposed an even bigger vulnerability. Oil prices had exploded. Hundreds of billions of new petrodollars were now sitting in Middle Eastern accounts. If these countries started dumping dollars, or worse, pricing oil in something else, the dollar system would collapse entirely. The US had to act. And fast. Enter William E. Simon, Treasury Secretary. Nixon gave him a mission: go to Saudi Arabia. Come back with a deal. Failure is not an option. His job? Persuade Saudi Arabia to take those massive oil profits and recycle them right back into the US economy. Buy American bonds. Invest in American markets. The goal wasn't to push oil prices down. It was to capture the flood of petrodollar profits and channel them into America's reservoir. A higher dimensional power play. Hashtag part 2. Money for security. How do you convince a country to hand you billions of dollars? You don't threaten them. You solve their biggest fear. Simon understood something fundamental. Both sides were terrified. The Saudis were sitting on astronomical wealth but surrounded by threats: Iran, Iraq, Soviet-backed movements, domestic opposition. What they lacked was military power and modernization expertise. The US was broke. Vietnam drained the treasury. The dollar was untethered. Deficits were exploding. What the US needed was a massive, reliable buyer for its debt. Both sides had what the other needed. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil in dollars and invest the vast majority of oil revenues in US Treasury bonds and American financial markets. In exchange, the US would provide advanced weapons, military protection, and development expertise. A closed loop. Saudi pumps oil, world pays in dollars. Saudi recycles dollars into US bonds. US uses the capital to fund deficits and sell weapons back to Saudi. Two things Saudi got out of this. Financial security, US treasuries were the safest asset on earth. And military security, American weapons and a defense commitment from the world's superpower. For the US, multiple wins. A stable buyer for government debt. Massive arms sales profits. And most importantly, Saudi Arabia wasn't just an energy supplier anymore. It was a stakeholder in the dollar system. Its survival depended on keeping the dollar strong. The model replicated fast. Iran under the Shah became another client. Flush with oil money, dreaming of a Persian Empire revival, Iran bought American weapons on an industrial scale. F-14 Tomcats, destroyers, tanks, they nearly emptied the Pentagon's shelves. Each weapons deal was another pipeline sending petrodollars back to America. Then came an even cleverer move. Kissinger's team called it the Nile Triangle. After the 1973 war, Egypt's Sadat wanted to dump the Soviets and align with the US. But Egypt's economy was collapsing, and Congress wouldn't approve massive aid to a former Soviet ally. So Kissinger found a workaround. Let Saudi Arabia pay for it. Under US arrangement, wealthy Gulf states provided billions in aid to Egypt. The US brought technology and corporate investment. Arab capital, Egyptian labor, Western technology. The petrodollar became the financial foundation for Egypt's strategic pivot from Soviet ally to American partner, eventually leading to the Camp David peace accords. Saudi Arabia essentially became the ATM of US Middle East strategy. Quietly, the US turned a key Soviet ally into a strategic partner using someone else's money. The system looked bulletproof, but it had a fatal flaw from day one. ## Part 3, the hegemonic legacy. Here's the paradox at the heart of the petrodollar system. It solved America's immediate crisis brilliantly, but it planted seeds for almost every major conflict in today's Middle East. The blowback started fast, and it started in the country the US had bet on most heavily, Iran. Under the Shah, Iran's oil wealth flowed in two directions: advanced weapons and elite luxury. The gap between rich and poor exploded. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, trained and equipped by the US, crushed all dissent. Islamic scholars, students, workers, anyone who questioned the regime was silenced or disappeared. This wasn't just inequality. It was cultural humiliation. Westernization was forced from above. Traditional values were mocked. And the anger built and built until it found a voice, an exiled cleric named Khomeini. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution swept the country. The Shah's island of stability collapsed in weeks. America's most reliable regional ally became its most determined enemy. Death to America became a national slogan. Then came the hostage crisis, 52 Americans held in Tehran for 444 days. The US lost Iran entirely, but the deeper damage was still coming. The same year, Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan. Afghanistan sits at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, the gateway to the Persian Gulf. For the US, still traumatized by Vietnam, sending troops was off the table. So the familiar playbook: find someone else to fund it. Saudi Arabia stepped up again. Billions of petrodollars. The CIA and Saudi intelligence jointly funded, armed, and trained mujahideen from across the Muslim world to fight the Soviets. It worked. 10 years later, the Soviet Union withdrew in defeat. Afghanistan became the graveyard that helped end the Cold War. But the network didn't disband. The fighters, the weapons, the training camps, they all stayed. And they evolved into something the US never anticipated. One of those fighters was a wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden. He took the network, the experience, and the ideology, and turned it against his former backers. The roots of 9/11 were planted in those Afghan training camps. Funded by Saudi money, armed by American weapons. This is the paradox of the petrodollar legacy. To solve an immediate crisis and defeat one enemy, America helped create a far more unpredictable long-term threat. And Afghanistan itself? After 10 years of war as a geopolitical chess piece, it was devastated. Infrastructure destroyed. Civilian casualties in the millions. Warlords, civil war, the Taliban. Even today, one of the poorest, most unstable countries on earth. The ripple effects spread into Pakistan, Central Asia, extremism, drug trafficking, terrorism. All downstream from a proxy war funded by petrodollars. Yet here's the bitter irony. These conflicts didn't weaken the petrodollar, they reinforced it. Instability pushed oil prices higher. Higher prices meant more dollars flowing through the system. More demand for US bonds. The system fed on its own chaos. Until the market caught up. By the mid-1980s, the world was changing. Western countries developed energy-saving tech and slashed oil dependence. New oil fields, the North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, came online outside OPEC. The market flipped from shortage to glut. OPEC fractured. Some members secretly overproduced to grab market share. Saudi Arabia, trying to hold the line by cutting its own production, realized it was the only one taking the hit. In 1985, Saudi Arabia flipped strategy. No more playing the good citizen. Full production. Let prices fall. Oil collapsed from over $30 a barrel to under 10. The petrodollar golden age, built on high prices, was over. ##the big takeaway. The petrodollar system wasn't a conspiracy. It was a deal born from mutual desperation. America needed capital. Saudi Arabia needed security. Both got what they wanted for a while. The full arc. From crisis to creativity to blowback to collapse. The dollar's power came not from military strength alone, but from controlling the plumbing of global capital flows. The real contest between great powers isn't just resources. It's who writes the rules for how money moves. Money for security works, until the security you provide creates the instability that destroys the relationship. Iran, Afghanistan, extremism, these weren't accidents. They were structural consequences of a system that traded with elites and ignored populations. And the system's end wasn't political. It was economic. Markets adapted. Technology changed. New suppliers emerged. No amount of geopolitical engineering could override supply and demand forever. Today, the petrodollar's legacy is everywhere. US-Saudi tensions, dollar hegemony debates, the global shift away from oil. Understanding this history isn't just about the past. It's a lens for understanding the financial and geopolitical rearrangements happening right now. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe. I break down one book like this every week. The ideas that actually explain the world. See you next time.